Hi, I'm Whitney Espick, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Hello and welcome, MIT alumni, friends, family, friends and family from MIT. Thank you for joining us today and coming together as one community from around the world to share the MIT Alumni Association's first of its kind, day-long virtual celebration of the MIT experience. Coming up now is our next program, A Roadmap for Recovery, Shaping the Future of Work in a Post-COVID World. My name is Patricia Cortes, and I'm an MIT alumni, PhD course 14, that's economics, from the class of 2006, and will be serving as your moderator for this webinar. I am a labor economist, and I work across the river at Questrom School of Business at BU, and I work on immigration and gender gaps. And I'm so happy that you all have joined us today, and I wish you're doing the best in these very uncertain and difficult times. As a reminder, our webinar is being broadcast live today. Throughout the program, you may submit your questions using the Q&A feature located in your Zoom toolbar. Questions will be held under the Q&A portion of the presentation, and we look forward to a good discussion with our audience today. Please don't be shy. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Professor Thomas Kochan. Tom is the George Maverick Bunker Professor of Management, a professor of work and employment research, and the co-director of the MIT Sloan Institute for Work and Employment Research at the MIT Sloan School of Management. Tom's research focuses on the need to update America's work and employment policies, institutions, and practices. His recent work calls attention to the need for a new social contract at work, which anticipates and engages current and future technological changes in a way to build a more inclusive economy and broadly shared prosperity. His most recent book is entitled Shaping the Future of Work, a Handbook for Action and a New Social Contract. Tom is an active member of the MIT Task Force on Work of the Future. Tom, welcome and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you for all the organizing of the alumni by the Alumni Association staff. And I want to welcome our alumni. You are part of, as our president said this morning, Raphael Reif, one MIT, and no time like today that we need unity and we need our common efforts to address these big problems in the world that we're experiencing. We are clearly in a period of time where the world of work is being transformed. We knew this even before this COVID crisis. A number of us at the request of our president and provost have formed something called the Task Force on Work of the Future. And we've been looking at how automation is changing the world of work, how we need to improve the quality of jobs. And we've been at that work for over a year now. And now we are pivoting a bit to incorporate the lessons that we're learning from this crisis. And that's what I want to talk with you today. But I want to do it in a way that is consistent with the tradition we have here at MIT that you all know so well. And that is by engaging you in a call for action. We don't just want to predict the future, we want to shape the future of work. And we have the knowledge and skills, and I think we have the common shared interest in doing so. So what I'd like to do today is to engage you in a discussion of three challenges and opportunities. The first two reflect the current crisis, and the third is this longer term task that Patricia mentioned of building a new social contract that is more inclusive, productive, and equitable for everyone. But before we turn to that, we also want to ask the question of what are we learning from this crisis? How can we use this to transform work to make our societies more resilient, productive, fair, and inclusive and equitable? And in particular, I want to focus on some of the pragmatic issues that we face as we try to reopen our economies, bring people back to work, doing it in a way that is first safe, secondly acceptable to all of the stakeholders in our organizations, and third, more productive. So let's start talking about that, and let's discuss it in the question and answer period as well. Let me start by putting this in context. This is a slide I use all the time when I talk about the current state of work. And it reflects that we have had a long history of problems in our labor markets and in our economy for average workers. Prior to the 1980s, you see these two lines on this graph moving up together. As productivity in the economy grew, so too did the average wages of American workers. But somewhere around the 1980s, this changed. Productivity continued to grow, but wages stagnated and flatlined since then. And if there's one picture that illustrates the tension, the anger, the frustrations that we've experienced in our economy and in our society over the last several years, I think it's this gap between productivity, economic growth, and average wages. As the economy is growing now, too many workers have been left out, and they feel it's unfair, and they're frustrated, and they are beginning to raise their voices in a more active way, as I'll talk about in a moment. This is our underlying challenge to address, to build a new social contract, not to go back to whatever it was that kept wages and productivity growing in the post-war decade, but to deal with the issues that we find today in the economy we find today with the workforce. So that's the longer term background. But now let's take us right up to this period of time just before the COVID crisis hit. In January of this year, yes, we still had persistent slow wage growth, although we were beginning to see some improvements at the bottom of the labor market as states increased minimum wages. But we had 5 solid years of employment growth. We were at about a 3.5% unemployment rate. Employers were having a hard time finding the talent that they needed, and that's a challenge for employers, but it's good for society. Yet there were increased debates around automation, and that's what led to the creation of our task force on work of the future. And there were increased worker unrest, more protests, more strikes, more people saying they wanted a stronger voice at work, but were unable to find the way to exercise that voice in a constructive way. The economy experienced this massive tax cut that was good for business, but it didn't really filter on down to the workforce. The stock market did well, largely because companies used a lot of their revenue and savings to use stock buybacks and to pay more dividends. And at the same time, our largest business association, the Business Roundtable, CEOs of our largest and most important corporations in the United States said, maybe we have gone too far in maximizing shareholder value, and all of the pressures that graph illustrates and other things that they were experiencing in the economy say it's time to start to pay attention to multiple stakeholders, to workers, to customers, to suppliers, and to the environment. And so this was where we were just before the COVID crisis broke. Then it comes, and I want to emphasize that I think there are a number of lessons that we can learn from this experience, and I'll talk through them. First, addressing the holes in our social safety net that we've experienced, the need to rebuild worker voice, but in a way that builds trust by engaging workers. And then I'll talk a bit about the changes in technology and how we can put them to work and how we are putting them to work in this experience at the moment in constructive ways, including people working on these issues here at MIT. We'll talk a little bit about how to navigate the return to work as you bring your colleagues back to work, as you go back to work, for those of you who have been either working at home or been out of work in this pandemic crisis. So let's get on with it. One of the clearest things that we have seen in this pandemic is that the holes in the safety net in the United States for the workforce have been laid bare. And these 5 things, or these 6 things here, I think all need to be addressed, and in some ways all have been addressed to some extent in a temporary way. We've recognized that now, as more and more people are out of work, we have to find a way to wean ourselves off this employer-provided health insurance system. Now, I'm not arguing for a single payer or any particular plan, but I am arguing very clearly that coming out of this crisis, there's going to be a national debate about how to make sure that people have continued health care coverage for themselves and their families, as whether they are at work or out of work. We also recognized we had to deal with this embarrassing situation of being the last democratic country in the world to not have a paid family and sick leave program. That those at the bottom of the labor force were largely left out of the paid programs that companies have for higher income people. And so the temporary provisions that have been put in place are a step in the right direction. There will be a debate about whether we continue those or find a way to address that on a permanent basis. In the United States, we now have 40 million people who have filed for unemployment insurance. And we have extended unemployment insurance to more workers in the gig economy, independent contractors. We're going to have to figure out a way to do that on a national basis as we come out of this mess, because we can't have people who are in two classes: regular employees, standard work arrangements, and gig workers, independent contractors who are outside, who don't have unemployment insurance, aren't protected by workers' compensation, or aren't protected by safety and health or anti-discrimination protections. And we turn to unemployment faster than our European country colleagues. In Europe, particularly in Germany and Denmark and other Scandinavian countries, they emphasize employment continuity with shortening the hours, reducing hours, and then using their unemployment insurance system to make up the difference in wage cuts that were used to shorten hours, but keeping people employed. We found that those countries that did that in the Great Recession of 2007 and 2009 came back faster. And I think there's a lesson here. Now Congress is struggling with how to figure out how to bring people back to work and to bring them off unemployment. We should find ways to keep people employed, maybe take some wage reductions, but then supplement those wage reductions for both business and for labor as we move forward. As we go back, we're not going to be going back to the same jobs in many cases. Many of those jobs are going to be gone permanently, and organizations are already thinking about how to invest more in new technology. As a group that I've been involved with in the World Economic Forum, we're seeing much more interest in investing in automation and finding ways to restructure work, as we did again in the Great Recession. So as we go back to work, we're going to find that many of the jobs have changed, the skills have changed, and we are going to need to invest enormous amounts of private and public resources to train and retrain and help the workforce do the redeployment to the jobs that are going to be available. And then finally, many people will be out of work for a long period of time, and we're going to have continuous labor market income supplements, whether we call that unemployment insurance, wage insurance, or some other form of assistance through our tax system. That's very clear that this is going to have to be a part of the labor market policies of the future. I have a particular concern that we are now in a situation where the immigrants that we now recognize are doing so much of the essential work in our economy are left out of our safety net. Many are afraid to come out of their homes for fear of being deported at this point in time. And so they're not getting the food stamps. They're not getting the unemployment insurance coverage. Many of them are really left on their own and are isolated. I'm not arguing for a long-term immigration reform. I think that has to come later, but we really need to end the discrimination against our immigrant workforce. We are all essential workers today, and we have to be treated as one workforce, not in these segmented ways. A bit closer to home, for the kind of work that I do, historically, I've done a lot of work on labor management relations. I've been an advocate for innovative, cooperative labor management relations, and I've watched the voice of the American workforce decline as the labor movement has declined. We have then done research on this by doing national surveys, and we find there's a big voice gap for people at all levels of our economy, from professionals to salaried and hourly workers themselves. And right now, we see the problems with that as the so-called emergency workers don't have a voice at work, particularly around how they're going to come back to work and what the safety practices are. And I'm going to emphasize this a little bit more when we talk about how to bring people back to work. But we have to get to a point where everyone has a voice at work, whether that's through a traditional union or through some sector-based council or work council at the enterprise level, or through board representation of workers. Somehow we have to find a way to make sure that we are all working together, but listening to each other, engaging each other, making sure that we respect each other's right to have a voice in improving our conditions of work and improving how we work. That's a crisis we're in right now, and I've argued in various writings that states ought to be experimenting with new approaches. But as we come out of this, we have to have a national debate over how to update our outdated labor policies to fit with the current workforce, the current economy, and find new ways of representing and advocating worker views in our organizations. I think that's what the evidence tells us the workforce needs. That's what our economy needs to get us back on a track where wages and working conditions move in tandem with the economy, and it's a big challenge that we face. Now let me turn for a moment just to some of the work that we are doing here on this task force on work of the future that the president and the provost set up. We have the best roboticists, the best AI experts, the best labor economists. Many of my colleagues here in the management school that have joined me in this task force. We have our folks in urban studies and political science all across MIT's community. We are working on how to help us shift from this notion that there's some technologies out there that are going to be brought into our organization and fundamentally change work in ways that the technology demands, to what we call a technology pull strategy. And we're seeing this really come alive now in this crisis. That is, if necessity is a mother of invention, as Plato once said, well, we are living it now. We are seeing across MIT, across the economy, across the world, more and more use of technology now to help us solve these big problems that we are facing, whether it's redeploying production technologies to make healthcare equipment, as we're doing in the auto industry and in various parts of manufacturing, as we're seeing in some of our what we call fab labs, originated here at MIT, decentralized program, decentralized labs across the world. There's about 2,000 of them now, where we're using 3D printers and integrated forms of fabricating technologies to create masks and various kinds of equipment, including repair parts for ventilators and all kinds of innovative things, using the technologies to solve problems, not to force technology on organizations or to say, we've got the solution, you've got the problem. The organizations and society is saying, we've got the problems. Can you use your creative technologies to work with us to integrate how we address these issues? We're seeing the same thing with some of our best broadband providers, expanding now to help students across the country get access to this global experiment in online learning. And this is going to require some significant changes in how we bring technology in. Traditionally, we have seen this as a sequential process where the vendors come up with an idea, or our IT specialists come up with a new technology. They say, we are going to bring it in all in one big felt swoop, and we're going to then think about how we have to retrain the workforce to address and work with this technology. We have found in the auto industry from the 1980s to today, that's very inefficient. Toyota had a much better approach by showing that if we integrate our thinking about how we reorganize work and how we train the workforce in advance to work with these technologies, we get the most productive results, and we get the most acceptance and the most continuous innovation in our organizations. But this is an organizational change strategy. And we are emphasizing this in our task force. We're emphasizing this in our teaching of our MBAs and our executives today, in our executive education, in our online course on shaping the future of work. And I invite you all to think about what kinds of changes in organizations are needed to make sure that we integrate technology so it supports good work, it supports innovation as we go forward. Now, let's turn to some of the very, very practical issues everyone, you all are facing in your organizations as leaders and in your organizations as individual contributors. How do we navigate the return to work in ways that bring people back to work, give them the confidence that it's safe to be there, and can get the work done in a way that protects our customers, protects our clients, protects our staff, and make sure that we are moving forward all in one unified way. It's no question that we have to engage the workforce. The best companies have strong leadership from the top. We have to have leadership from the top saying, here are the standards, here are the protections, here are the investments we are going to make. We're seeing this in our best companies across the globe are doing that. But the best companies also recognize that top-down leadership is not sufficient in this period. At MIT and at Sloan School, we teach about distributed leadership. And we say that leadership can come from all levels of the organization. And now is the time to make sure that we are listening to people at all levels of the organization. I spent some time with one of our best high-tech communications companies over the last couple of weeks. And they are encouraging, yes, their CEO has a weekly dialogue and network on Zoom with the full workforce. But then they encourage self-organizing support groups to say, what do we want to contribute? How do we make sure that we are taking care of each other? How do we make sure that the environment that we are working in at the local level is safe? And how do we recognize that everybody is a little bit different? Everybody has a little different family situation. And so some families require longer time and more support in coming back to work. They may have children at home that need family and support and childcare. They may have elderly parents or relatives that they are taking care of. They may have people with some health issues that make them more vulnerable. And so the best organizations are listening to people on the front lines, giving them a voice in how do we come back? When do we come back? Who is going to come back? How do we schedule our work in ways that reflect the differences? I worked with a hospital out in Seattle recently where they negotiated a new arrangement with their nurses and with their environmental service employees to allow them to schedule at a decentralized level, team by team, as long as they could meet their patient needs, and to take care of each other, to support each other as they were coming back to work and as they go forward. And they do that in cooperation with management, and management endorses and has an opportunity to reflect on the changes, making sure that patients and all the needs are taken care of. That's the kind of distributed leadership and trust and voice that we need so much more in the future. And so that's the way in which we will bring people back. I have worked with Mary Rowe someone many of you may recall was our lead ombudsperson for 40 years here at MIT. And she has been talking to her colleagues around the world. And what they are telling her, there are two issues on everyone's mind: safety first, and be prepared, at the bottom of this slide, for dealing with the emotional and mental health challenges that people are experiencing. These are going to be with us, and the way in which we address those by engaging people and making sure we are taking care of each other at the workplace is going to be critical to building a more productive, resilient, and equitable organization and economy in the future. And then what about all this work at home? Like many of you, I have spent the last several months working at home, adapting as we have at MIT to online teaching, using this technology and a range of others. And we have learned a lot about how to do that. But I'm worried that at the same time we are doing this, some organizations and vendors are out there selling their wares with technology, with more and more monitoring, invading the privacy, trying to keep track of how much time am I spending on my screen, how much time am I spending on my work, when am I taking breaks to take care of family or other responsibilities at home. If that's going to be the way in which we manage, we will lose the trust of the workforce, we will invade privacy, and we will have a backlash, as many of those organizations are experiencing. So we need to learn to measure our performance by the productivity of the projects that we achieve, by achieving and completing our projects. I've been doing some work with IBM recently, and we have a very good team of people working on how do we make sure that we use all this modern technology to focus on project completion and then rewarding people for the performance based on their project achievements. Well, that's the way in which we can move forward together and make sure that we maintain trust. I mentioned the need to build consensus at a team-by-team approach. But I also want to worry a little bit that as we engage in online activities, we lose some of the social aspects that drive innovation at work. The so-called water cooler discussions, or the ability to go down the hall and find someone, try out an idea and get feedback. The best organizations are now recreating that. I've worked with an organization recently where they are fostering small groups of people who are part of larger meetings, and then say, let's go offline, let's create our own little subgroup to share ideas. I've got an idea on how we can move our project forward. I don't want to do this just on my own. I need to get some feedback and see if it resonates and get your ideas for how to move forward. So allowing small group, rump groups, support groups, whatever we want to call them, to form is one way in which we are finding the best practices in organizations, really making sure that we don't lose the innovation that comes from being present and having spontaneous conversations at work. We all need training. One of the things I am so thankful for at MIT, and particularly in the Sloan School, we have had the best information technology group one could ever ask to help us make this transition to virtual teaching. And we have had each other teaching ways of doing this best, learning how to use our chats, using breakout groups, using all kinds of new tools, and shortening our lectures down to small teaching modules to make sure that we keep people engaged. Make sure that we are training each other to use these technologies effectively, and we are learning from the best of our teachers, the best of our IT specialists, the best of our students, informing us how we can be more effective. And I think that way of managing these virtual teams will make the economy more productive in the future. Now, let me finally turn to this issue of the social contract. None of this is going to get us where we need to go unless we recognize that we have to work together. None of our stakeholders have all the answers. We have to break out of our silos. where business talks to business, labor talks to labor. Technology vendors talk to each other in Silicon Valley or at Kendall Square or in 128 or around the world in their little technology islands. We have to really bring all of our interest groups together with those of us who are in education, who are using online learning and building, as our colleagues in our open learning program are so good at doing. And you heard from Sanjay Sarma, one of our best and most innovative leaders at MIT, describe his vision for the future of online learning and how it integrates with a lifelong learning, how it integrates with our vocational schools and our universities and even our grade schools. So we have to find ways to cross these boundaries, work together to forge a new social contract. And that includes working with labor groups and government groups. We need their support. We need to engage in constructive ways, and we have to make sure that we start the dialogue and close the divisions. Unfortunately, we are meeting today in a time of crisis in our country, given unfortunate developments and unfortunate situation around that is dividing us again along racial lines. This includes cutting across racial, gender, and all other divisions in our society to make sure that we are moving in a direction consistent with this notion of one MIT, it's one US economy, one US society, one global economy. And we have to make sure that MIT uses its traditions to help to close these divides. And if you'd like to join us in doing this, I invite you to do so in any of these three ways. Help us shape the work of the future. Bring your ideas into this process. We teach an online course and it's self-paced, and you can join it right now by going to our edX Works site, right, that's listed here in these slides, and these will be available to you. To join that course, we're discussing these issues with people from all over the world, and you can participate and learn from all of the people who are involved in the work of the future, because we have our roboticists and AI specialists and economists and others all engaged in this course. And we have a social contract exercise where you can bring your ideas by going to this website and vote on what you believe the workplace of the future should look like. What do we need from business, from labor, from government, and from education? And I invite you to participate in that way. And I also invite you to participate in this initiative we have in the Sloan School called the Good Companies, Good Jobs Initiative, where we are working very hard to bring research to bear on how do companies compete on the basis of both being highly productive and profitable, but also creating and sustaining good jobs and good careers for the workforce. That's what we are all about here at MIT. Our students are getting more and more interested in this. They are demanding courses along these lines. We are supplying them more fully now than perhaps any time in the past. And we want to continue to do that. But we want to do it with you out there in the workforce, whether it's through our executive education, through the online course, through the exercises, or through webinars like this. Let's continue to learn together. Let's demonstrate that the power of MIT is the power of innovation in shaping work. Yes, making predictions is important from a scientific standpoint, but our strength and our culture is one of solving problems. And that means we shape the world of work in the future that responds to the challenges that we are experiencing today. So let me stop there. Let me invite your questions. Let's have a dialogue about these issues and see how we can move forward from here. So thank you for your patience, for participating with us, and I look forward to talking about with you about your questions.
Oh, okay, so thanks, Samalan, for that engaging presentation. So now we go to Q&A questions. I have read through many of them. Now more are coming and more are coming. So I'll try to ask you as many questions as I can. There have been questions both about how did we get here to this poor social contract, the effect of COVID, and also how do we go forward. So I'll try to put together the different types of questions. So let me start with how do we move forward. So I'm going to read you a question that I thought was interesting and kind of a natural question here, that is, what is your opinion about the role unions have in the future, you imagine? And if the role should change, how could that happen?
A long time.
Okay.
That's a very good question. I apologize. I'm still learning this technology, as you can see, but I apologize. A very important question, and it's one that's on the minds of many of us on this task force. And we will speak to this in our next report. But basically, I have worked over my full career to try to encourage labor and management to work together, to find new ways of bringing voice to workers. The way in which we need to do it is labor organizations need to become much more engaging of workers at the front line, working with their supervisors in teams and with managers to improve work processes, to address their issues of safety and how they do their work, to drive innovation. And then we need mechanisms for negotiating in new ways to get wages not only at the level of the firm, but across the sector, across the industry, to grow together. And maybe we need to expand the scope of bargaining to address the new technologies so that workers can bring their voice into the design stage early enough so that we integrate work and technology. And then finally, our research tells us through national surveys that today workers want a voice in corporate governance. They want what Europeans have. That is a works council where they provide advice on a whole range of issues that affect their livelihood on a consultative way, not in a striking and negotiating way, but in a problem-solving way. And maybe even representation on corporate boards of directors. We have a very good young colleague in the economics department, Simon Yeager, who has done work on workers on boards of directors in Europe, in Germany. And what he finds is that by putting workers on boards of directors, they don't necessarily extract higher wages, but they encourage a longer term view, more investment, more capital investment that keeps the business growing and stable and successful over time. So we need to transform our employment system to be more cooperative. We have worked with Kaiser Permanente and other organizations over many years to build labor management partnerships where they work at all of these levels, at the front line where teams of workers, nurses, environmental service workers, doctors, and technicians on ways to continuously improve technology. They work to bring the new technology into their clinics so that they can have what they call care anywhere, and using telemedicine and using monitors and tablets and the automated medical record system to augment their work. And that's because they work together with a common vision, labor and management, union and management, all focused on improving patient care and making Kaiser Permanente the best place to work. That's the vision that we have. That's the vision that many in the labor movement now have. Not enough people have yet. And we need to reform our policies and institutions to get on with that task.
Okay, that's good. Turn to another question that it's also related at other agents that can move us forward to the social contract. It says, you don't have to answer exactly with name, but it says, are any political candidates in the US talking with you? And do you have specific suggestions for what the incoming president should and could put into place?
Well, I am very, very happy to say that we are seeing more of these issues discussed in this election cycle by people at local levels, at state levels, governors and state representatives, legislatures, people running for Congress, and yes, people running for president. This was very active in the debates going on over the last several months. And there are many people who are bringing their voice into that discussion now in the political campaigns. I'm not here to endorse a candidate. I think that's inappropriate territory. I can have my own personal views, but I think our task is to work with these candidates, to inform them, to bring the evidence that we have learned from our research about how we move forward. So I am proposing to candidates that will listen at all levels and from whatever party they happen to be affiliated with, that we need a transformative labor policy that's integrated with an economic strategy and an economic policy for getting the economy back on track, for investing in our future, investing in renewable energy, investing in infrastructure to make sure that we extend broadband and internet technologies to everyone in our economy and to all the families who are going to need it for continuing education, to making sure that we rebuild the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure that we need, and to do that at high labor standards. And that means yes, we need a new labor policy to make that work, but it has to be integrated with a vision for the economy that invests in our future, brings people back to work with high quality jobs. That's not just my view. My view is shared by a vast majority of other labor economists and specialists. Many of my colleagues here at MIT are working on these issues, and we are working with candidates at all levels.
Okay. Next question also related to constructing the social contract, most related probably to a safety net. And one of our audience wonders what's your view on UB income, universal basic income.
Yes. Well, there's been a good discussion of that over the course of the last several months. Many people are skeptical of universal basic income because of the cost that would be necessary to bring enough income to everyone across the economy. And many of us are also worried that it doesn't take into account the many functions that work serves in our society. Certainly, work serves an economic function to create healthy families and a living wage and so on. But it also is a source of our identity. It's a source of who we are. It's a source of social and psychological satisfaction. It has a moral component that many of us believe it builds the kind of character, as my mother and father used to say, hard work is good for you and it's good for others. And it builds a sense of contribution to society. We can't ever give that up. And so I'm a bit of a critic of universal basic income. I do believe we have to create a stronger floor for families and create incentives for work. And there are a lot of tools we can use. Income tax credits, earned income tax credits is one way. Living wage, minimum wage is another way. Having a voice at work so that we increase wages as profits and productivity grow, so that as the economy and as our organizations prosper, so too do workers and families across the board. So we need to rebuild in those ways. And then we have to make sure if there are people who are left out, that we provide the essential funds and food and nutrition and healthcare, so that no family, no person is left out of our economy and our society moving forward. That may mean some minimum standards of income support, but I don't think universal basic income as a single solution is workable in the future.
Okay, so now I'm gonna ask you a question. I've seen at least 3 or 4 of our audience ask this question. It's related more to how do we get here? And it's based on the graph that you show us about how productivity and wages were moving together, and at some point about the 80s, around the 80s, they just diverge. So I'm just gonna read one question related to that. So one of your first charts showed the big rise in productivity and no similar rise in wages. Why do you think that was able to happen? And what do you think it will think to, okay, so seriously reverse that? Is it a political matter?
Sure. That's a question I spend a great deal of my time teaching and studying. So let me put it in historical perspective. The reason wages and productivity moved from the end of World War II to about 1980 in tandem is because in the 1930s, in that Great Depression, the New Deal labor legislation was put in place, and that laid a foundation for decades to come. So we got unemployment insurance, we got minimum wages and protections for women and children working, and limits on child labor and so on. We got the Social Security system that provided a decent retirement, started to invest for retirement. And most importantly, the cornerstone of that New Deal legislation was the National Labor Relations Act, providing for rights to unionize. And then during World War II, as we came out of that, we saw a growth in the labor movement, a growth in union representation, collective bargaining come along in ways that we had a formula that was negotiated first in the auto industry and then across the board that said, as productivity at the national level grows, so too should we increase wages in line with increases in cost of living and productivity. And that spread across the economy to union and non-union employment settings. And that worked quite well up through the 1970s, but then the economy became much more subject to international competition. We had more deregulation. We have a growth in demand for high skills with higher technology. And so that social contract broke down. And we had a shift in government. We haven't really replaced those, that old social contract with a new one since then. To do that, we've got to come up with new ways to use technology, all the robotics and artificial intelligence and new fabrication technologies and so on, to enhance productivity, and then to have in place wage policies that help share the benefits, whether it's through profit sharing, through new norms at the workplace that say workers should have a share in the productivity growth, and we're going to enforce those policies through stronger worker voice in setting wages and in working conditions. All of those have to come together. And we're going to need the government to take a more active role. If we are going to invest in infrastructure going forward, then we should insist that firms that get government contracts, whether it's for infrastructure or for support for rebuilding our healthcare system, or support for just the goods and services that are sold to the federal government, we should hold those employers to a standard of fair wages, of good wages, and fair working conditions. And that will help bring up the rest of the economy. Now, we teach, my colleagues in Sloan, a number of us teach, how do we lead and manage competitive organizations that create and sustain good jobs. My colleague Zinab Tan calls it a good job strategy. I encourage you to look at her work. I encourage you to look at the Good Jobs, Good Companies, Good Jobs initiative website, because we have all kinds of ideas about what it takes to build a high productivity, high wage economy and organizations. We can compete in one of two ways. We can compete by trying to maximize profits by holding down wages and having lowest labor costs, like some of our companies in the retail industry have historically done, or other companies in retail and other companies in other parts of the economy say, we're going to compete by having the most productive, the best trained workforce, the most engaged workforce. That's going to create high productivity, drive innovation, drive profits, and support good jobs and good wages. That's where we need to go. And I think we can get there, but we need to continue to diffuse these high road strategies.
Okay, thank you. I had a question I wanted to ask that is related to this. Because all of these changes at the organization level, usually one think of big organizations, but there are lots of small businesses. And to what extent is it that easy for small businesses to adapt all of these ideas of good jobs or the changes that are required for a new social contract?
That's another really important question, and one that I'm very concerned about and very interested in. Obviously, our small business sector has been decimated in this crisis. Restaurants, hospitality, all of the recreational programs, daycare, those jobs have either been lost or they're working at a very, very low level of capacity. I believe that small business can support good jobs if they follow the same principles by engaging their workforce. We now have recognized that we've got to increase the minimum wages so that they are all competing on the same basis, so that we don't have low road employers in small business hold back the high road firms. We also have to recognize that innovative startup companies imprint the employment practices that are going to carry forward as they grow right from the beginning. We have seen lots of research by our colleagues here at MIT and elsewhere that whatever strategies are followed at the beginning, if we're going to build an innovation team, then some of the best startups, and we have brought startups in robotics from MIT graduates who believe in bringing all of their employees along by providing family care benefits, by providing good wages, by providing training, by providing profit sharing, so as the company grows and stock ownership, everybody on the team grows with it. So we have to do that at a small scale, recognizing that it's not easy. But if we engage people at the workplace and we treat them all as one family, then I think we can all prosper together. But it takes a little bit more personal leadership and imprinting and those values and those practices right at the beginning when we start these small businesses. So as we restructure, we have an opportunity to recognize that so many of the people who were essential to us during this crisis now need to be treated more fairly. We saw them as essential. We increased their pay. Sometimes we call it hero pay in the nursing homes, healthcare sector, in the grocery sector, industry. Well, we've got to recognize that we've got to continue to treat them as valued partners and pay them adequately as we move forward.
Okay. Another question. Is tax policy affecting corporations and high-income individuals an important element?
Yes, and this is not an area of specialization for myself, but we have some of our best economists at MIT. One in particular is focused on how we can equalize the tax benefits for investing in human capital, in people, as we do for machinery. Daron Asamogo is working very hard on ideas along these lines, along with David Otter, who's helping to lead our task force on work for the future. They are going to come out with very strong ideas about how we need to reform our tax policies to invest more in human capital. So don't have to turn to me. That's a little bit beyond my area of specialization. But I'm delighted to have these colleagues and others, not only at MIT, but across the country. And you know them, Patricia, very well, because this is your work, thinking about how we can use our tax policies to invest in our workforce and to reward workers and reward firms for investing in our workforce. That's got to be part of the debate in the future, and it has to be part of the way in which we reform our tax policies.
Okay. Now, another change brought about by the pandemic, besides showing like the lack of a good social contract, is the way we work. So many of us were forced to now work from home, and many people are wondering how permanent is going to be that. changing people's preferences? Are companies learning that people can be productive at home? What do you think is going to happen in the future after the COVID crisis is gone with working from home?
Well, I believe this is going to be a transformative experience. We are learning about both the strengths and the limitations of working at home. And I believe that this experience is going to open up opportunities for more people, a broader cross-section of our workforce, to work at home part of the time. I don't believe this is going to lead to a universal and complete work from home set of careers, because we are social animals. We do need to see each other face to face. Yes, we can do it through this mediated technology, and we will do it even more frequently, and we will use it more to substitute for traveling long distances to get jobs done. But the social aspects of work are so important to innovation and so important for us to see the strengths of each other's ideas and to really demonstrate how we can work together and to get to know each other even better as people and and know our families, and to recognize when we see someone down the hall, or we say good morning to someone, we take a look at them and we see maybe they're not smiling today. Maybe there's something going on that we can just, how are you doing? What's going on? We can't substitute that easily through this mechanism. We can get better at that. But I believe more and more people will have the flexibility to work at home. As managers and as leaders, then, we have to find ways to allow people to figure out what's the optimal mix of working at home and working together in our offices or in our other places of work. And so I hope that we will have more flexibility. We will find ways to mix these modes of interaction. We will find ways to trust people to make those decisions. And we will extend it to larger segments of our workforce that in the past perhaps were required to come in to work. And I am so proud of MIT on this dimension. Our leaders at MIT, and I give great credit to Raphael and to our leaders at the central part of MIT, but also to our deans. Particularly, I can only speak to the deans and to the leadership in the Sloan School, but they have made sure that as we all, as faculty members, work from home, that there's equal support for the staff, making sure that they also can be part of this process. And they have contributed to making our ability to work at home much, much more successful. And so it really is one MIT. And that's what I want to see in the future in all organizations. But I don't believe that people will be permanently and fully working at home. We will find the right mix if we as leaders and managers are comfortable with allowing people to mix these modes of interaction.
Okay, I think it's time for us to close the session. Thank you, Tom, a lot for that amazing presentation and discussion today. Very relevant, very important. And we want to thank all of the people who have joined us today from all around the world for giving us the questions and listening to this important topic. Coming up next in another Zoom room at 3 p.m., please join us for Hal Gregersen's Leadership and Professional Development Program, Challenge-Driven Leadership in a World of Change. It should be equally interesting as the one we just heard. Thank you again, and from myself, Professor Kochan, and our community here at MIT, we wish you well. Goodbye and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, Patricia. Thanks.
Bye, Tom. Have a good one.
Bye.
Have a good one, everybody.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.